Join us in prayer. Thank you, God, for giving us today. It is great having a friend and teachers to study and learn. Help us to be grateful in every way as we learn to be trustworthy, respectful, responsible, fair, and caring citizen of today. Please watch over us as we explore and learn joyfully. Please bless our teachers, friends, and family.
Chapter 3, Lesson 4.
Cubism. Early 20th century avant-garde art movement that revolutionized European painting and sculpture and inspires related movements in music, literature, and architecture. In Cubist artwork, objects are analyzed, broken up, and reassembled in an abstracted form. Instead of depicting objects from a single viewpoint, the artist depicts the subject from a multitude of viewpoints to represent the subject in a greater context. Cubism was revolutionary, new approach to representing reality invented in around 1901 to 1908 by artists Pablo Picasso and George Braque. They brought different views of subjects, usually objects or figures, together in the same picture, resulting in painting that appear fragmented and abstracted. Cubism means a style of art that stresses abstract structure at the expense of other pictorial elements, especially by displaying several aspects of same object simultaneously and by fragmenting the form of depicted objects. So the main characteristic of synthetic cubism were the use of mixed media and collage and the creation of a flatter space done with analytical cubism. Other characteristics were greater use of color and greater interest in decorative effects. Cubist vision. The Cubists saw the limitations of perspective as an obstacle to progress. They wanted to introduce the idea of relativity, how the artist perceived and selected elements from the subject, fusing both their observations and memories into the one concentrated image. Analytical and synthetic cubism. Here, the artist analyzed the subject from many different viewpoints and reconstructed it within a geometric framework, the overall effort of which was to create an image that evoked a sense of the subject. These fragmented images were unified by the use of a subdued and limited palette of colors. Cubism was born in France but immigrated across Europe and integrated with the artistic consciousness of several countries. It emerged as Futurism in Italy, Vorticism in England, Suprematism and Constructivism in Russia, and Expressionism in Germany. It also influenced several of the major design and architectural styles of the 20th century and prevails to this day as mode of expression into the language of art.
Dadaism.
Dadaism or Dada is a post-World War I cultural movement in visual art, as well as literature, mainly poetry, theater, and graphic design. A protest against the barbarism of the war and what Dadaists believed was oppressive intellectual rigidity in both art and everyday society. Its works were characterized by a deliberate irrationality and the rejection of the prevailing standard of art.
Who founded Dadaism?
Richard Hasenbeck, a poet and painter-musician, Hugo Ball selected the word of random from a German-French dictionary. Dada was coined in Zurich in 1916. A nonsense word, it means yes, yes in Russian, there in German, baby talk, and hobby horse in French.
History of Dadaism.
Dadaism was a cultural manifestation which grew in the beginning of the 20th century, more precisely between 1916 and 1923. Nihilism, endangered by war, and the revolutionary spirit raised by the Cubism, the first revolutionary art movement, were the key factor behind the movement's growth and appeal. It employed a barrage of demonstration and manifestos, and exhibition of absurdist art which were designed to shock both the authorities and the general public. Cabaret Voltaire was founded in Zurich by Richard Hasenbeck, Hugo Ball, Hans Arp, and Tristan Tzara as an early center of multicultural Dada event and protest show. The word Dada was invented, but one of the most common origin stories that Richard Hasenbeck found the name by plunging a knife at random into a dictionary.
Reception of downfall and dissemination of Dadaist ideals.
The Fountain, a major Dadaist work by Marcel Duchamp, was rejected at the exhibition of the Society of Independent Artists, causing an uproar among the Dadaists. It influenced later modern art movements such as surrealism and pop arts, and led important innovation in fine arts like collage and photomontage.
Dadaist philosophy.
The idea is more important than the work itself. Para lang naman sa akin, mas mahalaga ang idea kaysa sa mismong gawa. Pero dahil ang mismong gawa ang nagpapakita ng idea, kung ganun mo na-express, yung gawang ginawa mo. Art can be made of anything. Dahil, ang art ay pwede mong gawin sa kahit anong paraan. Kung paano mo makita ang pagiging artistic mo, pwede mo pakita ito sa pagsusulat, sa paggawa ng kung anong bagay, o kaya sa pag-emit ng kung ano-ano. Kung paano mo ma-express yung art na meron ka, o yung talent na tinatago-tago mo.
Surrealism, defined as psychic automatism in its pure state by which we propose to express verbally, in writing, or in any other manner the real process of do, the dictation of do in the absence of any control exercised by reason and outside any aesthetic or moral concerns. In other words, the general idea of surrealism is nonconformity. This nonconformity was not as extreme as that of Dada, since surrealism was still considered to be art. Breton said that pure psychic automatism was that most important principle of surrealism. He believed that true surrealists had no real talent. They just spoke their thought as they happened. Surrealism used techniques that have never been used in the art world before. Surrealists strongly embraced the ideas of Sigmund Freud. His method of psychoanalytic interpretation could be used to bring forth and illuminate theonoconscious surrealism. 1970. Freud once said, "A dream that is not interrupted is like a letter that is not opened," and surrealists adopt this idea into their artwork. Surrealist technique. A number of specific techniques were devised by the surrealists to evoke psychic responses. Among these were frottage, rubbing with graphite over wood or other grained substances, and grattage, sculpting the canvas, both developed by Ernest to produce particle images, which were to be completed in the mind of the viewer. Automatic drawing, a spontaneous uncensored recording of chaotic image that erupt into the consciousness of the artist and found objects. Concept and styles. Surrealism shared much of the anti-rationalism of Dada, the movement out of which it grew. The original Parisians surrealists used art as a reprieve from violent political situation and to address the unease that they felt about the world's uncertainties. By employing fantasy and dream imagery, artists generated creative works in a variety of media that exposed their inner minds in the eccentric, symbolic ways, uncovering anxieties and treating them analytically through visual means. The rise and decline of surrealism. True surrealism originated in France. Strains of it can be identified in art throughout the world, particularly in the 1930s and 1940s. Many artists were swept into its orbit as increasing political upheaval and a second global war encouraged fears that human civilization was in a state of crisis and collapse. The immigration of many surrealists to the Americans during World War II spread their ideas further. Following the war, however, the group's ideas were challenged by the rise of existentialism, which, while also celebrating individualism, was more rationally based than surrealism. In the arts, the abstract expressionists incorporated surrealist ideas and usurped their dominance by pioneering new techniques for representing the unconscious. Burton became increasingly interested in revolutionary political activism as the movement's primary goal.
So, op art is also called as optical art, is a style of visual art. Bridget Riley is a well-known British artist celebrated since the mid-1960s for her distinctive, optically vibrant paintings called the op art. She then explores optical phenomena and juxtaposes color either by using a chromatic technique of identifiable use or by selecting achromatic colors like black, white, or gray. Bridget Riley, Victor Vasarely, and another artist called Jesua Rafael Soto were three of the most important op artists. Riley is an English painter known for her singular op art paintings. She lives and works in London, Cornwall, and in France. Then Vasarely was a French-Hungarian artist credited as the grandfather and leader of the op art movement, utilizing geometric shapes and colorful graphics. The artist created compelling illusions of spatial depth as seen in his works. And lastly, Jesua Rafael Soto was a Venezuelan op and kinetic artist, a sculptor, and a painter. This artist made large-scale sculptures that employed light and motors as well as sculptural materials to create the illusion of movement in space that is fundamental to all op art. Op art is achieved through the systematic and precise manipulation of shapes and colors. The effects of op art can be based either on perspective illusion or on chromatic tension. In painting, the surface tension is usually maximized to the point at which an actual pulsation or flickering is perceived by the human eye. So, dito sa op art, it is important to play with the shapes, colors, and surface tension to create a visually and more believable 2D and even 3D art. Then, ito yung example na kinuha ko. Op art that is made by Victor Vasarely in 1975. It's called Untitled. Vasarely insisted that pure form and pure color can signify the world. This art has precise combinations of lines, geometric shapes, colors, and shading. He created eye-popping paintings full of the illusions of depth, movement, and three-dimensionally. Next is pop art. Pop art is an art movement that emerged in the United Kingdom and the United States during the mid to late 1950s. Pop art started with the New York artists Andy Warhol, Roy Lichtenstein, James Rosenkranz, and Claes Oldenburg, all of whom drew on popular imagery and were actually part of an international phenomenon. Warhol was a successful magazine and ad illustrator who became a leading artist of the 1960s pop art movements. He ventured into a wide variety of art forms, including performance art, filmmaking, video installations, and writing, and controversially blurred the lines between fine art and mainstream aesthetics. Roy Fox Lichtenstein was an American pop artist during the 1960s along with Andy Warhol, Jasper Johns, and James Rosenkranz, among others. He became a leading figure in the new art movement. His work defined the premise of pop art through parody. He became famous for his bright and bold paintings for comic strip cartoons as well as his paintings of everyday objects. He was one of a group of artists making art in the 1960s who were called pop artists because they made art about popular things such as TV, celebrities, fast food, pop music, and cartoons. James Rosenkranz was an American artist and one of the proponents of the pop art movement, is best known for his colossal collage paintings of enigmatically juxtaposed fragmentary images borrowed largely from advertisements and mass media. Claes Oldenburg is a Swedish-born American sculptor best known for his public art installations, typically featuring large replicas of everyday objects. Another theme in his work is soft sculpture versions of everyday objects. Like other artists of the pop art movement, he chose as his subjects the banal products of consumer life. The movement presented a challenge to traditions of fine art by including imagery from popular and mass culture such as advertising, comic books, and mundane mass-produced objects. Pop art is a style of art based on simple, bold images of everyday items such as soup cans painted in bright colors. Pop artists created pictures of consumer product labels and packaging, photos of celebrities, comic strips, and animals. The pop art movement aimed to solidify the idea that art can draw from any source and there is no hierarchy of culture to disrupt this, in reference to its intended popular appeal and its engagement with popular culture. It was called pop art. Here is the example of pop art by Richard Hamilton entitled "Just What Is It That Makes Today's Home So Different, So Appealing?" a 1956 collage. In 1956, Hamilton created his famous collage, which is considered a landmark in 20th century British art because of its startling prophetic qualities. It was the first work of pop art to achieve iconic status. Within it are contemporary Adam and Eve, surrounded by the temptations of the post-war consumer boom. He is poking fun at the materialist fantasies fueled by modern advertisements. This whole collage anticipates bodies of work by future pop artists. The painting on the back wall is essentially a Lichtenstein, the enlarged lollipop is an Oldenburg, the female nude is a Wesselmann, and the canned ham is a Warhol.
Good day, I'm Gerald Palalay and I'd be discussing minimalism and conceptual art.
Minimalism. Minimalism was an art movement that developed in the United States in the late 1950s and reached its peak in the mid to late 1960s. It is also sometimes called minimalist art or ABC art because it focuses on basic elements. It grew out of ideas expressed in the early 20th century by people like the Russian artist Kazimir Malevich, who pioneered abstract art by painting pictures with no reference to things visible in the real world, no trees or people, no landscapes or still life scenes. So basically, minimalism is a form of abstract art that focuses on basic elements such as lines, shapes, and color. Minimalism was also a reaction to the most prominent style of art pursued in the 1950s, abstract expressionism, in which the art conveyed multiple meanings of intense emotion, ideas, feelings, and was sometimes created in spontaneous or unplanned ways. An example of abstract expressionism is Willem de Koonin's work Woman 5, done in the early 1950s. It is aggressive, emotional, and almost violent in its brush strokes and lines. Important characteristics identify minimalist art. One of the most common is repetition, or creating multiple images of the same shape, especially simple geometric forms like lines and squares. Artists repeat shapes to produce paintings composed of vertical color blocks. Many works are extremely simple, pared down to the fewest possible lines or forms needed to paint the image. Areas are smooth and finished, devoid of obvious brush strokes or hints of the artist's hand. Minimalist art focuses on things like geometry, line, and color. Early works tended to be monochromatic, limited to one color and related hues, like black, gray, and white. Another way to identify a minimalist painting is by looking for precise and hard-edged borders between areas of color. There is no shading or subtle transition. An important characteristic also in identifying minimalism is It's not very expressive. The artist removes all elements of biography or emotion. When you stand in front of a minimalist painting, you won't see big ideas, social agendas, or complex subject matter. The paintings are about geometry, shapes, and color. It is an art for art's sake without emotion involved. One of the most prominent minimalist artists or sculptors people like Donald Judd. Donald Judd began his art career as a painter and art critic in the 1940s. He was extremely important for his work to define minimalism, especially in his essay Specific Objects, which advocated for art made from everyday materials. But he gradually moved into woodcuts and then focused the rest of his career on sculpture. Among prominent minimalist painters, one of the earliest was Ellsworth Kelly. His works feature hard-edged, precise borders between blocks of color. Active first in the mid-1950s, he predates the clear establishment of minimalism, but in paintings like Red, Yellow, Blue, White, and Black from 1953, he clearly displays the characteristics later art, especially hard-edged, flat areas of color. He later moved on to some more sculptural works. One of the most important minimalist painters is Frank Stella. In the late 1950s, he caught the immediate attention of the art world with his series of black paintings, monochromatic paintings with uniform geometric lines created in bands of black paint. An example of one of these works is A Marriage of Reason is Creole, painted in 1959. When asked once to define minimalist art, Stella summed it up this way: what you see is what you get. Conceptual art, modern form of contemporary art which gives priority to an idea presented by visual means that are themselves secondary to the idea. Conceptual art, while having no intrinsic financial value, can deliver a powerful message and thus has served as a vehicle for social political comment, as well as a broad challenge to the tradition of a work of art being a crafted unique object. Indeed, some conceptual artists consider that art is created by the viewer, not by the artist or the artwork itself. Note that due to the overlapping nature of conceptual installation and performance art, many artists are involved in all three genres. Conceptual art was in part a reaction against the tenets of formalism as expressed by the transient New York art critic Clement Greenberg. Formalism considers that the formal qualities of a work, such as line, shape, color, are self-sufficient for its appreciation, and all other considerations such as representational, ethical, or social aspects are secondary or redundant. Conceptual art is all about ideas and meanings rather than works of art, like paintings, sculptures, other precious objects. It is characterized by its use of text as well as imagery, along with a variety of ephemeral, typically everyday materials and found objects. It also typically incorporates photography and video as well as other contemporary media such as computers, performance art, projections, installation art, and sound. One might say it was an artistic revolt against the increasing commodification of art and or the creative limitations imposed by modern art taught in traditionalist venues. His famous conceptual art portrait of Iris Clert, which is a telegram sent to the Galerie Iris Clert. Robert Rauschenberg was invited to take part in the group exhibition Les 41 Persons Iris Clert, or 41 Portraits of Iris Clert, for the inauguration of Galerie Iris Clert's new exhibition space in Paris in 1961. Calvin Tompkins reports that Rauschenberg, who was in Sweden for the installation of another exhibition at that time, forgot to make a portrait as promised. At the last minute, he sent the telegram stating, "This is a portrait of Iris Clert, if I say so," for inclusion in the show. Robert Rauschenberg's purely conceptual contribution destabilizes all conventions of traditional portraiture, proclaiming identity as a subjective condition. unstable, and at the whim of the speaker, the reader. The referent of the I in his text becomes ambiguous as each viewer reads the work, while Rauschenberg's absurd gesture follows in the neo-Dada spirit of the time. It simultaneously presages the trend toward emphasizing the conceptual and the art that would come to the fore later in the decade.
So I am Alros, assigned to discuss the photorealism and installation art. So photorealism is also called as surrealism. It is an American art movement that began in the 1960s, taking photography as its inspiration. Photorealist painters created highly illusionistic images that referred not to nature but to the reproduced image. Artists such as Richard Estes, Ralph Goings, Arthur Flack, Robert Bach, and Chuck Close attempted to reproduce what the camera could record. Several sculptors, including the Americans Dwayne Hanson and John DeAndrea, were also associated with this movement. Like the painters, who relied on photographs, the sculptors cast from live models and thereby achieved a simulated reality. A photorealistic typically projected a photographed image onto a canvas and then used an airbrush to reproduce the effect of photo printed on glossy paper. Estes claimed that the idea of the painting was involved primarily with the photograph and that the painting was just the technique of finishing it up. And the characteristics of photorealism is that it is rich in imagery. It is that when you paint or describe something, but you do it in a way that it relates your five senses. Second, it representation of an image from a photograph in microscopic exactness. Third, it is highly detailed or full of information. Lastly, is that the aim is to recreate the same sharpness of detail throughout the painting. And we are now in installation art. So what is installation art? Installation art is the term applied to three-dimensional works that usually occupy the entire room or gallery and are created to change the perception of a space. An installation art developed in the 20th century. It grew out of artists working in the 1950s and 1960s who focused on conceptual art, which is art based on ideas rather than aesthetic qualities of finished works. Some artists began to create environments, creating gallery spaces or organizing events that happen in the real world in a set of period of time. Such work fed into the idea of room-sized works. The term installation art began to be used in 1970s. Then the characteristics of an installation art is that it is mixed media, means using more than one art medium. Such works might involve traditional arts like painting, sculpture, and textiles, as well as words, text, and utilitarian materials. Many installations incorporate found objects, cast of everyday materials repurposed for use in art. Some installations used audio and video components as well as light and other technologies. An installation art mostly are large. Most installations are site-specific. They are created to be placed into and around a specific space, like a large gallery in a modern art museum. Some installations involve actions by the artist as part of the artwork. Both factors result in most installations existing for a temporary or finite amount of time. When the installation is over, the physical work disappears, although it may be documented in photos or video. For this reason, most installation art falls under the category of time-based media, which is art that is described by its duration rather than the typical measurements of height, length, and width. Installation art is about the experience of the person immersed in it. Audiences see these works by walking into them or through them and being surrounded by them. Installation can be sensory experiences involving sight, sound, smell, and sometimes touch. By nature, installation art serves as rebuttal to the monetary focus often placed on art. In a world where some art commands increasingly astronomical prices at the auction, artists who create installation art knowingly created art that cannot have monetary value. It can't be collected because it's so large and complex. The value lies in the experience of the art itself. The types of an installation art is that any type of material or media can be utilized, including natural or man-made objects, painting and sculpture, as well as recent media such as film, animation, various forms of photography, live performance art including happenings, sound, and also audio. An installation art in the Philippines is that it consisting of strong Malay and Chinese influences as well as those Spanish and American colonization and the effects of American globalization. Manila has developed into Southeast Asia's most progressive art hub. The city is paving its way to becoming an international art destination. Currently, many old buildings are being turned into galleries and alternative spaces. Filipino artists are increasingly participating and being included at international art fairs, auctions, biennials, with contemporary pieces being acquired by key collectors and museums all over the world. However, with all of these developments, Manila's contemporary art scene is far from its peak or exhaustion. Revisions and improvements are clearly needed, and unfortunately, individuals from the local and international art scene, the government, the corporate community, and the general public are tirelessly responding to this demand. This makes the art scene in Manila contrary to all the stereotypes of its being decadent, inspiring, chaotic, and laid back, worth touring and revisiting several times. Art Radar reveals when it is best to mark your calendars, how it efficiently navigates the city, and gives suggestions for several prestigious and down-to-earth art venues that would help you make the most of Manila's established yet flourishing art scene. And we have these three artists. The first one is Leroy New. It is a native of General Santos City who draws inspiration from anything and everything around him and even jumps from one medium to another, such as film, theater, fashion, sculpture, and visual arts. He also joined efforts to rehabilitate and restore the Manila's main waterway, the Pasig River, through the Bakawan Floating Project. Then the second one is Ace Ong. She elevates the craft of crocheting to modern table spreads or bed covers. Her colorful crochet creation vary from a gigantic bell jar to an upside-down tulip, from funny hats to kimono-inspired robes, from traditional tribal clothing to an out-of-this-world impression of leaves. Then the third one is Pathy Eustachio. She explores the theme of shadow fragmentation and dissonance through painting, drawing, and installation. So aside from the three artists, we have the other installation art. They are Lulim, Lyra Garceliano, Hannah Pettijan, and Isabel Godinez Achilizan.
Hi, I'm Alicia Isel Sanuan from BSN1, and I will be reporting about Constructivism and Abstract Expressionism. Constructivism. What is Constructivism? The Russian artistic and architectural movement that was first influenced by Cubism and Futurism is generally considered to have been initiated in 1913 with the painting reliefs. Abstract geometric constructions of Vladimir Tatlin. It is the theory that says learners construct knowledge rather than just passively take in information. It's a theory in education that recognizes learners construct new understandings and knowledge, integrating with that they already know. It is from the manifesto that the name Constructivism was derived. One of the directives that it contained was to construct art. Because of their admiration for machines and technology, functionalism, and modern industrial materials such as plastic, steel, and glass, members of the movement were also called artist engineers. Here's the other importance of figure-associated constructivism, where Alexander Rodchenko and L. Litsky, constructivism can be traced back to educational psychology in the work of Jean Piaget. Identify with Piaget's theory of cognitive development. Piaget focused on how humans make meaning in relation to the interaction between their experiences and their ideas. Jean Piaget falls into the radical constructivism camp. Lev Vygotsky, on the other hand, concentrates on the social aspects of learning through experiences. John Dewey straddles the line between the two perspectives and has many ideas that match with each side. Soviet opposition to the constructivist aesthetic radicalism resulted in the group's dispersion. Tatlin and Rodchenko remained in the Soviet Union, but Gabo and Pesmunen went first to Germany and then to Paris, where they influenced the abstraction creation group with constructivist theory. And later in the 1930s, Gabo spread constructivism to England, and in the 1940s to the United States. Lissitzky's combination of constructivism and suprematism influenced the vestigial artists and architects whom he met in Berlin, as well as the Hungarian Laszlo Moholy-Nagy, who was a professor at the Bauhaus. In both Dessau and Chicago because of Nazi interference. The new Bauhaus was established in 1937. Moholy-Nagy disseminated constructivist principles. Constructivism, impression, and style. Constructivism developed side by side with suprematism, the two major modern art forms to come out of Russia in the 20th century. Constructivism was an artistic and architectural philosophy that originated in Russia beginning in 1950 by Vladimir Tatlin and Alexander Rodchenko. Abstract and austere constructivist art aim to reflect modern industrial society and urban space. Constructivism firmly embraced the social media and cultural developments that grew out of World War I. And the October Revolution of 1917, it was envisioned as a towering symbol of modernity. Built from industrial materials like glass, steel, and iron. Though the tower was never realized, it has become one of the symbols of constructivism. Paintings were included, but Popova declared that they should only be considered as design for eventual constructions. Many of the pioneers in constructivism had also studied suprematist ideas, but they increasingly experimented with three-dimensional designs. They also began to attack traditional forms of art, which it was thought Constructivism could supplant. Here's the artists of Constructivism. Vladimir Tatlin, beginning in 1950, he was a Russian artist. Anton Febsner, 1884 to 1962, he was Russian-French artist. Boum Gabo, 1890 to 1977, 1920 American artist. Alexander Rodchenko, beginning in 1915, he was a Russian artist. Zyklitsky, 1890 to 1941, he was a Russian artist. Characteristics of Constructivism. The basic formal characteristics of constructivist art included the use of geometric or technoid primary forms arranged in a space or surface in harmonious order. Constructivist painters rejected bright, colorful palettes, and experimented with the effects of light and movement. Abstract Expressionism, a broad movement in American painting that began in the late 1940s and became a dominant trend in Western painting during the 1950s. Abstract Expressionism is the term applied to new forms of abstract art developed by American painters. It is a post of World War II art movement in American painting, developed in New York City in the 1940s. It was the first specifically American movement to achieve international influence and put New York at the center of the Western art world, a role formerly filled by Paris. Here's the characteristics of abstract expressionism. Despite this variety, abstract expressionist paintings share several broad characteristics. They often use degrees of abstraction. They depict from unrealistically or, at the extreme end, forms not drawn from the visible world. They are basically abstract. They emphasize free, spontaneous, and personal emotional expression. They show similar emphasis on the unstudied and initiative application of that paint. They display the abdomen of conventionally structured composition build up out discrete and segregable element. Approaches and style. The middle ground within abstract expressionism is represented by several varied styles, ranging from the more lyrical, delicate imagery and fluid shapes in paintings by Gustin and Frankenthaler to the more clearly structured, forceful, almost calligraphic pictures of Motherwell and Gottlieb. Artistic style in which the artist seeks to depict not objective reality but rather the subjective emotions and responses that objectives and events arouse within a person. Abstract expressionism had a great impact on both the American and European art scenes during the 1950s. Characteristics of abstract expressionism painting. Abstract expressionist paintings share certain characteristics, including the use of large canvases and an all-over approach, in which the whole canvas is treated with equal importance, or as opposed to the center being of more interest than the edges. And that's all of my report. I hope you understand the flow of my report, and thank you for listening. God bless us all.
And together with my group, we will end up this report by the closing prayer and quoted words.
Closing prayer. We thank you, Lord, for this wonderful opportunity that we have learned today. and for the knowledge and wisdom that we will continue to harbor. We thank you for giving us teacher who is compassionate and kind in the journey of leading us a student in a brighter tomorrow.